Good afternoon, Mr. Mukherjee, Vishal, the distinguished panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I will be speaking briefly. Before I start, I must thank Bengal Chamber for inviting me to share my thoughts on the subject of creation of demand. I will be speaking very briefly on the demand aspect, the potential and the expected growth, and particularly some innovative areas where demand generation can be there, which already have introduced in some of the very developed countries, including China. Before I do that, let us have a total view of the demand scenario and where we are, why we are left behind, and what are the concerns. Because if you are aware of the issues that are involved in constraining demand and meeting the demand by the domestic producers, only then we can think of looking ahead. The first table shows that while crude steel production in India in 14-15, the year we have just left, was about 8%, which is a very substantial growth compared to what the Honorable Finance Minister was saying about the global growth scenario in other countries. It has come down in the later part of the current financial year. But if you see the real consumption, there is a jump from 3.1% to 4.6%. Unfortunately, this incremental growth is now being met by the growth in imports, which have gone from by 71% last year, and now it is another 51%, whereas exports are further coming down. So this is one of the issues that will continue to plague the Indian steel industry while creating capacities and others. And as you know, government has been somewhat sympathetic at last with the steel industry's plight and enhancing the customs duties and also imposing safeguard duties. And I absolutely agree with Mr. Mukherjee that this is a purely temporarily short-term measure, and the industry must come up for matching the threat of global imports. The second slide shows that the projection of the steel also that have been made. My dear friend P.K. Sen is here from Tata Steel. They have been doing a commendable job in projecting the steel demand for the World Steel Association short-range outlook, which will show while all country-wise there is a negative or negligible growth in demand, India's demand growth projection is the highest. Now let us see what are the growth imperatives. First is per capita low consumption, so there is a huge potential, and there is no two opinion about that. And the second one is that steel industry is basically linked with the growth of gross domestic product, which has now been converted to gross value addition. And as per this, the projection that has been recently made by IMF in their World Economic Outlook, India's growth has been projected even exceeding China in the current year as well as in the next year, against a very low growth of Europe and also Japan. However, we are very much concerned that while the GDP may be growing, there is not a commensurate growth with the steel industry. The linkage has somewhere lost. Why it is so? The first reason is, Mr. Mukherjee has also mentioned about the low steel cement ratio. If you see the charts, it shows that steel cement ratio, which was about 0.318 in 2009-10, in 2014-15, that is after about 5-6 years, it is now 0.363. 14% growth in 5 years, which is very, very little to the growth potential that India is having. The second concern is the low share of investment. That has also been touched upon, and the low share of investment of 34% of gross domestic capital formation as a percentage of GDP against 45-46% of China. Even in South Korea it is 42%. The private corporate sector investment is really dwindling, and that is the latest RBI survey that has said. And I think this is more or less related to the uncertainty in the market. As a result, business scenario is not favorable for investing in the steel and other manufacturing industries. And there is a clear relationship between, if the uncertainty index goes up by 10%, investment goes down by 1%. That is the current scenario. The people are very much apprehensive, particularly the private corporate sector, about the rate of return of their investment. And then low share of manufacturing. As a percentage of GDP, in our current share of manufacturing is about 18-19%, which is appreciably lower than all other major steel producing countries like China 31%, South Korea 30%. However, another point that has been mentioned about the steel industry's difficulties of marketing the incremental demand is the cost of production. However, as Mr. Abbasi has said in the morning, Indian steel production cost is higher than CIS in China, but substantially lower than Brazil, Japan, Korea and US. However, if you see the cost of production breakup, you will find that Indian steel industry has more, they are consuming more the raw materials, particularly the energy consumption cost is very high. So there is a potential for increasing the cost of production by upgrading technology continuously. I need not go into the details, a lot of papers have been already published on this. However, when this low cost produced material leaves the factory gate and reaches the customer premises by paying excise, by paying VAT and by incurring huge internal freight, the price at the customer's premises is much higher compared to what the imported steel reaches them. So there is a differentiation between Indian steel industry being cost competitive and the customer's perception of Indian steel when they get the steel at his premises. So there are some outside elements that need to be considered. The second most important growth perspective is there is a massive deficit in infrastructure. Hopefully the government's all other program of Make in India, Housing for All, 100 smart cities, and now last week they have announced the 300 smart villages, dedicated freight corridor, extension of national highways, minor major port and airport expansion, ultra mega power project, all these and the renewable energy, all these project construction is a big generator of steel demand, and we are waiting very eagerly when the government will come forward, because unless the government comes in, it will only crowd in the private investment. Unlike the earlier theory in economics that when the government comes in, it crowds out private investment. But here the nature and the measure of investment that is totally required in a particular sector is much more than the government can afford. But government can surely be a driver of making first investment, and then it will be followed by the private sector. And the sectoral growth where actually the demand will come has been projected, like there are three major sectoral sectors that comprises about 62 plus 9, 71 plus 22, about 93% of your steel consumption is accounted by construction, 62% growth, projected at 6.5 to 7% growth. Automobile, which is now slowly coming up due to the bad period they have experienced, about 8 to 9% growth, and engineering and processing industries about 7% growth. So now we come to these specific areas where the steel demand can be generated with this background. My first idea is the maximum volume-wise demand generation can come only in the commercial building structure. This is all steel framed structure. You have seen the modern airport, more preferred. These are larger spans, column free, greater floor area, faster construction, lesser floor to floor height, and cheaper also in life cycle cost. Our institute has published some documents which will show that steel based construction on the life cycle analysis is lower even for the RCC construction. Then second area is the prefab buildings with cold formed steel. Unfortunately, the cold formed steel for the prefab buildings There is some codal issues, the IS 801, which we are trying to formulate. It will surely come in another few months' time. And when this building will be totally demanded by all the institutional buyers, particularly the government sector, which always wants a code and standards for these buildings. It is very convenient in the difficult terrain, much faster construction, and the advantage is that it is dismountable and it is relocable. However, shop fabrication needs further financial encouragement because of the basic fact that when you fabricate steel in the site, you don't pay any excise duty. Whereas in the shop fabrication, which is much following the standard SOPs, are much disadvantaged by paying that high excise duty. As a result, the fabricated structural products for prefab buildings become costlier when it is fabricated in the shop floor. I think government has to come forward with some fiscal measures so that shop fabrication is very much, publicized. Mr. Sarjanji is here. JSW Severfield is one of the best fabricator in the country for fabricated structures for the high-rise buildings and multi-rise buildings. Unfortunately, the fabricated structure in the shop becomes costlier due to this excise implication. Then, along with the government emphasis on the massive augmentation of the road network, there is a need for small span bridges, and these bridges are very much easy to construct in steel, fewer replacement needed and more life than the RCC bridges. And our institute has made this small span bridges design as advised by the Ministry of Rural Development and Ministry of Roadways, Transport and Highways. This is for 3 meter to 40 meter with different widths, and the design has been accepted by the ministry. They are doing this proof checking analysis, and within 3 to 4 months these small span steel bridges, the designs will be given free to the contractor, and then there will be a huge expansion of these small span steel made bridges in the coming months, and I am sure this will generate a huge lot of demand for the steel materials. Then there is a facades and composite panels. Steel composite panels are now very much needed for the interior decoration as partitions. However, the major competition is coming from the aluminium, which is much lighter, however costlier, and special grades of steel, lighter gauge, high performance steel is needed, and this is the architectural delight, I must say, with glass combinations. The next area is the multi-purpose furniture. This is a very big growth that has been envisaged in the multi-purpose steel made, and this will be color-coated steel sheet will be much used for the multi-purpose furniture. Our institute has already in dialogue with the National Design School in Pune, and hopefully we will be receiving some of the best designs which will make suitably designed with steel, and then there will be another area of big growth of color-coated steel sheet. It will be light and durable and much more aesthetically pleasing. Then there are other areas. I think our Honorable Finance Minister has said about the crash barriers. Unfortunately, crash barriers are still not made mandatory by the National Highways Authority, and we must have this mandated by the National Highway Authority, and then it will give a good demand generation for steel. Noise barrier, thus the research is on where color-coated sheet to replace polycarbonate sheets, and once this is done, there will be huge demand for the steel color-coated sheet. Then as a part of the Swachh Bharat Abhijan, steel-made toilets are becoming very, very popular. Our institute has made this design, and this November IIATF we will put up a prototype design, and once it is put on the attention of the ministries and the government agencies, there will be huge demand for these color-coated and also stainless steel, inside all stainless steel fitting toilets. Amenities like dhabas, petrol pumps and steel-made toll plazas on the highways, that will also generate a lot of steel. Another area, one of the area which is giving maximum growth is the retail sector. 18 to 20% is the compound annual average growth rate retail sector is having. In spite of steel industry having a poor growth of 3 to 4%, retail sector is having a very good growth, and they are getting venture capitalists to come around, crowd that sector in pouring investment. There is a multi-stack racks which very much preferred in the retail sector. It is a cold form steel is used, and it will be multi-level and fully automated. And so this will also create another new area of cold form steel structures. As a result of these new developments, the steel producers are also coming forward to make new grades of steel. Now TMT bar, as you know, 500, 550 will be giving way to Fe 600 and even Fe 700, which is so much, weight to strength ratio will be so high. The higher grades of general constructional steel like E410, E450, this is suitable for heavily loaded structure. Seismic resistant steels already has been developed. It is not only TMT, the structural steel also, seismic resistant structural steel is now coming, and particularly the seismic prone areas like Uttarakhand, Jammu and Kashmir, Gujarat, all the housing complexes, they are now preferring these seismic resistant steels. INSDAC is also trying to on this durability and corrosion resistance of coated products under varying temperature. Once these results are coming out, there will be huge demand for the color-coded products in various applications. Then new parallel flange beam has already invaded the market. Light gauge high performance steel. Auto sector is one area where a lot of value added steel, whether it is IF steel, bake hardening, dual phase steel, etc. Another growing area is the wind turbine. Wind turbine, you will know, solar panels exclusively 100% it is now being imported from China. Why? Because the entrepreneurs say us that the steel is not available. The particular steel that is required for wind turbine is EN 10025 S355 JR grade, and this is being developed after some researches. And once in another 1 year time, if this steel is developed, then wind turbine sector, which is very much growing now and has a lot of potential to grow, will be using this steel. Then hollow sections, the square hollow sections, the rectangular hollow sections, it has got a huge amount of, it is a light gauge as well as good performance steel. We are doing this manual also. We are also doing a manual on good practices of fabrication and erection, which is very much needed insofar as the construction sector is concerned. The last slide is on the rural sector demand. As you know, the current study says that in the rural sector, against our per capita consumption of 59 kg, rural sector is about 10 kg. That means about, if you say the 70% of rural population, it gives a consumption of only about 8.5 million ton. Just imagine if this can be growth, can we have about 40 kg, which is minimum, then there will be an additional demand of about 25 to 30 million tons of steel for TMT, structurals, color-coated sheets, plates for the rural sector, and for which very much needed that fabrication facilities are widely spread. And I am thankful to both Tata Steel, SAIL, JSW that they have come forward with their rural dealer network, which is very much extensive. These fabrication training for the masons and contractors are going on, and till date we have trained about 2,000 masons and contractors, small contractors, in the use of steel, the best practices of use of steel, bar bending technology, which has to follow some standard SOPs, as a result of which the demand for steel will definitely grow up. Now, I want to conclude my brief speech on the effort that has been done by our institute for promoting steel in this part of the country, eastern region, particularly the state of West Bengal. I am thankful to the government of West Bengal, the Ministry of MSME. They have come forward and advised us that why don't you develop some cluster development for steel fabrication, and they have given us a list of 6 backward districts of, it is East Midnapur, West Midnapur, Darjeeling, Kuch Bihar and Shiliguri. These 5 districts, we have identified 6 centers where 20 to 25 small steel fabricators. They make, shutters, they make bus bodies, they make furniture. These steel fabricators have come forward and joined the society. And the government of West Bengal will be, the project cost is about 3 to 3.5 crore in each area. Just imagine, we have identified this, the DPR has been submitted, and the common facility center will be created, and then this 20-25 steel fabricator will be very much get advantage in setting up their facilities, taking help, and as a result the steel fabrication will get a filling. And I am sure within a year we have a target of setting up about 50 different centers, not only in the state of West Bengal, but also in other states whichever will come forward. And there is a huge scope for small fabrication of steel. So gentlemen, so far as the demand is concerned, there is a huge potential of demand for steel and in India, and I am very optimistic that steel industry's growth in India will be very high, provided we can take care of the intermittent problems that we are seized with. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee. We'll have lunch at 2 o'clock and reassemble at 2:45, so that the last session is from 2:45 to 4 o'clock as per the schedule. I'll just mention in short that 30 years back I headed the marketing and purchase department of a PSU company called Nalco, and used to go to Shastri Bhavan. I used to always feel jealous why steel has a dedicated ministry by name, and all the non-ferrous metals, aluminium, copper, zinc, gold, we all came under Ministry of Mines. But over the years we have realized the strength of the mines, and which gives the raw material. So I will request under Mr. Mukherjee the panel discussion on the raw material to start. We have Mr. Mitral, we have Mr. Shashikant, and we have Mr. Vishal Agarwal. So hopefully between iron ore, coal, coke, we will cover the issues involved on the day.
Well, I'm sure that
price, but eventually it could be available at cost. Similarly, coal blocks were allotted to steel companies or sponge iron plants or captive power plants. Again, the underlying assumption was that this would be available at cost. So you know what when we fast forward to 2015 and we see the sector and look at the last 10 years really in perspective, what has really happened is that the iron ore mines were not really granted. The coal mines were cancelled because of interventions from the Supreme Court, and on top of that you had in the last 5 years, so really from 2010 to 2014, you had interventions from Shah Commission and the Supreme Court where various mines got closed down. So India, from being an exporter of about 120 million tons of iron ore, actually became a net importer. So if you see the trend from 2010 to 2015, that's really what has happened, and the iron ore prices have went up to a level where steel making was not really viable. So it's been a tremendous challenge over the last 5 years. Domestic raw material availability was the major challenge. And then with the new government, I think we saw a very significant reform with the MMDR amendment bill, which at least resolved the raw material availability issues and enabled mines to be given through the auction process going forward. There are still a few challenges going forward on that, but I think what it does ensure is that the raw material is now starting to become available. But the challenge is that in the meanwhile, the Russian ruble depreciated by half, and you had the Chinese overcapacity. So the steel product prices have in the meanwhile crashed. So I think as I look at the raw material scenario going forward, I think the challenge of the raw material has reduced in terms of availability. But I think it is important that the state governments now need to quickly auction the iron ore mines among steel companies only, so that you create a level playing field across the sector. I think the second challenge on the iron ore right now is the floor price. What is happening is, I think we heard Mr. Basi mention that even companies like Anglo get iron ore ex mine at about $10 to $15. Whereas in India, the mining costs are very low. But in spite of that, mining companies are selling iron ore where they are auctioning iron ore, but they are fixing a floor price which is artificially high. At least in Eastern India, you have government mining companies which are fixing floor prices which are significantly high. So if you have a certain volume to auction, rather than fixing a floor price, I think we need to move into a regime where there should be a reverse bidding till the entire volume is sold. So I think this is one shift that we need in the pricing policy of the iron ore. So everything that is produced is being sold through the auction, but rather than fixing a floor price which creates an artificially high price, it should be a reverse bidding format where the prices should keep coming down till the entire volume of what is put up for auction is sold. So this is where it's a bit of a dilemma, because some of the state mining companies want to protect the profitability, but yet the material is not being sold. So the problem we have now in Eastern India is that production has gone up, but the inventory has also gone up. So steel companies are still struggling with low production capacities, because the iron ore is at a price which is still unviable for making steel. So I think this is something that needs to get resolved. The second point is on the coking coal. I think the coking coal has traditionally had zero import duty, whereas in trying to rationalize thermal coal and coking coal, the import duty of 2.5% was imposed in the last budget. We have represented as an industry that this needs to go, because what has also happened in the meanwhile is that there is a coal cess which has been imposed, which is also an added burden for the coking coal consuming sectors. So I would just raise that point that I think the coking coal import duties is something that needs to get addressed. Coming to the logistics, I think essentially you have the port, rail and road logistics. So if we look at ports, I don't know how many of you are aware, but you had Paradip port in the last week which had come to a complete standstill. I mean, the entire movement from port to plants for all the steel plants in Eastern India were significantly impacted because of a few stevedores creating a cartel and dispatches not happening. I mean, it's a serious cause of concern that if a few stevedoring companies can say that we will not load the cargo, and for that you have the entire port which is not operating for almost a week. I think we need to introspect as to what really needs to be done to make sure that this is, and this all adds to the cost, because that disruption then creates a disruption in your operations. It sort of impacts your inventory build-up plans going forward. So I think that port infrastructure and the efficient handling logistics is something which needs to be addressed. Berthing delays are there, so you need more capacities to be built there. Even on the rail capacity, I think the rake availability is a big challenge.